Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. Good governance is a finicky thing. It's something we often take for granted, especially nowadays in our information-rich media environment that exposes everything. As an American, I oftentimes find myself complaining about the gridlock in Congress, the incompetence and lack of honesty in our elected officials. But whenever I take a step back and look at the long course of human history, along with many of the failed or failing regimes in the world today, I am reminded that what I should be looking for is not utopia, but perhaps just a little bit of stability. The thing is, sharing power was a relatively uncommon idea until very recent times in human history. Sure, you had some small examples, a city-state here, a tribal union there, but it's always been easier for one individual to claw and climb their way to the top, slaughtering every opponent along the way. Even today, there are democracies that are being toppled by strongmen and new dictators. And while many of us assume that these dictators are just evil individuals, I would argue that they are equally incompetent and perhaps also very overwhelmed by the job. This is really one of the big problems with tyranny or having a dictator. You only have one individual who makes all of the decisions, and that's just far too much work for one individual to handle. Now, the last decade or so has been quite bad for representative democracies and liberty. In 2016, Freedom House released a report stating that 72 countries since 2010 have become less free, and 2.6 billion individuals are living without basic freedoms and human rights. And this is before COVID even struck the planet and changed everything. In times of economic, social, and political crisis, when the average person is weakened, this is when tyrannical madmen and opportunist populists are the most dangerous. They will divide us by turning us against each other and then conquer whatever remains. So how do we prepare for future dictators? Well, we just take a look at humanity's massive collection of prophecies, otherwise known as science fiction. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the best tyrants in all of sci-fi. When Samurai Jack first came onto the scene, it was considered one of the best based on true story animated series ever produced. Its main antagonist was a shape-shifting demon. He also happened to be one of those rare, completely evil characters without any redeeming qualities. His ultimate goal is to rule the entire universe, including Earth, with his legion of minions. Unfortunately for Aku, and fortunately for the rest of us, when Aku invaded feudal Japan, the samurai only known as Jack stood against him. But the evil dictator throws the samurai into a time portal and sends him into a dystopian future where Aku has not only conquered Earth, but the rest of the galaxy. Samurai Jack would spend the next 50 years in the future fighting for the rights of the oppressed and abused, but his main goal was ultimately to return home, and also wipe out Aku's control of the galaxy. Is Star Wars science fiction, or is it fantasy, or is it just our own reality but reskinned with aliens? Sheev Palpatine is, in my opinion, one of the best political characters in all of fiction. What makes him dangerous is his ability to play the long game. Sheev Palpatine starts out small on his native planet of Naboo. After playing around patiently in local politics, Sheev Palpatine gains enough support to become the representative of the Chamal sector. There are too many planets in Star Wars for direct representation, so a bunch of planets are usually grouped together under one representative. Now, while learning the ropes in the political field, Sheev Palpatine was also secretly a Sith Lord on the side. His master, Darth Plagueis' public persona, was in charge of one of the largest lobbying groups in the galaxy. This meant that Sheev had access to basically unlimited amounts of resources which could be used to leverage the relatively corrupt Republic Senate. This was classic Palpatine. He always liked to have control of everything. And so, one of his main strategies for taking control was creating unrest in the Outer Rim territories. The more fed up these peripheral colonies and planets became, the more unrest that created for the current Chancellor, Finis Valorum. After a Trade Federation fleet attacked Naboo, Palpatine convinces Queen Amidala of Naboo to issue a vote of no confidence in Finis Valorum, which leads to his removal. And surprise, Senator Palpatine wins the chancellorship after that. Not only did Palpatine control many of the senators in the Republic through campaign financing, he was also a terrific deal-maker and organizer. He also rarely took a strong stance on anything and lacked an ideology. And so most people really liked him without even understanding why, because they didn't really know him. As Chancellor of the Republic, Palpatine brought back the federal military for the first time since the Ruusan Reformation occurred 1,000 years earlier. This was in response to the Separatist crisis and the appearance of a massive droid army. Of course, he failed to mention that his new Sith apprentice Darth Tyrannus was also Count Dooku, the individual who controlled the Confederacy of Independence. It's all about that controlled opposition, guys. Palpatine would continue to use the Clone Wars as a reason to take more executive power. At the same time, he would continue to weaken the Senate. He would also seize Separatist assets, resources, and even nationalize the bank so he can print his own money. Then one day, people woke up and found themselves in the middle of a tyrannical dictatorship, and no one even realized how it happened. Bravo, Sheev. Bravo. George Orwell's 1984 is considered one of the greatest novels of all time, not only because of its literary aspects, but because its themes of totalitarianism, suppression, and surveillance guard us from an extremely dark future, I hope. The totalitarian government in the novel, which controls the fictional superstate known as Oceania, is inspired by Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany. Two very extreme and radical governments on the opposite ends of the political spectrum who use very similar methods to control their people and maintain power. Big Brother is the face of this totalitarian government, and he is visible everywhere on screens and posters. He is both a cult of personality figurehead and also a constant reminder that one should always fear the party. In the world of 1984, there are very few freedoms afforded to the average person, and a thought police even invades the privacy of an individual's mind. And language has been altered to a point where it's so simple that now it's very hard to communicate full thoughts. There's a reason why George Orwell's 1984 is oftentimes compared with some of the more degenerate regimes in our world. And that's because Oceania has some very uncomfortable and also familiar aspects to it. Colonel Joe Moore was a veteran of the oil wars and a hero of the water wars. When the power was shut down and all of civilization collapsed, it was strong and tough men, usually military veterans like Colonel Joe Moore, that inherited the earth. At first, Joe just started a biker gang and roamed from town to town, raping and pillaging and just making everyone's life hell. His military experience allowed him to win battle after battle, and so his gang would continue to grow in size. One day, Joe and his crew were wandering in the outback when they found a massive aquifer. Joe and his men would take over the water source and turn it into the Citadel. It's at this point regular Joe becomes a Morton Joe, a mythical figure who apparently cannot die. He creates a cult of personality around himself and begins forming a society which worshipped him as a god. Morton Joe would acquire a lead mine, which he would entrust to his old military buddy, Major Kalashnikov, and he would also find a permanent source of fuel in Gastown. Morton Joe also began creating the War Boys. These were deathly ill and cancerous young men who served Morton Joe for a chance of a terrific afterlife in Valhalla. All they had to do was impress Morton Joe on the battlefield. They were most likely going to die a terrible death from disease anyway, so these are going to be some of the most fanatic soldiers you'll ever see. There's been a huge shift in the space exploration game. Instead of seeing nation-states in charge of most of the operations, we're seeing a growing number of space corporations like SpaceX. The reality is, if we don't do something soon, nothing will be able to stop Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and other individuals like them from colonizing the galaxy for themselves. In the film Total Recall, Mars is settled and colonized. It is run by a corporate dictator known as Velos Cohagen. The first mistake these corporals made when they came to Mars was building crappy domes, which exposed a large percentage of the early colonists to too much radiation. This led to mutations in the population. Now, these mutants were unruly and began resisting Cohagen's authority on Mars. Cohagen really wants to get rid of these mutants, even though he literally is selling air to them for profit. He ends up having his good friend Carl Hauser infiltrate their movement so that he can reveal where the mutant leaders are and destroy them. President Snow is a tyrannical ruler of Panem, a post-apocalyptic version of the United States in which all human beings left live in a different district, usually separated by what type of industry, services, and goods they produce. An important part of Panem's culture is what's known as the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games were designed to keep the nation entertained and under control. Once a year, each district selected a boy and girl between the ages of 12 and 18. They would be placed in an outdoor arena together and forced to fight each other to the death on a nationally televised show that civilians were forced to watch. This was sort of a punishment against the 13 districts for rebelling against the capital many years ago. The victor of the games won their district a large allotment of food, which was a pretty big deal. The Hunger Games consumed the districts in competition against each other. It dominated Panem society and distracted them from the cool rule of President Snow. Like Palpatine, President Snow's kind appearance belies a much darker nature. Well, there you have it, guys. That is my list of tyrants in science fiction. I know you guys have some to add to it, so please let me know in the comment section down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist.